On VLGA Connect, it's time for our regular governance update, and we welcome back from Civic Mind, Stephen Cooper. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Chris.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good to see you again. There's always something happening in the governance space. A couple of things we want to touch on today. We'll talk about the sections of the new Act that are just coming into force now. We'll talk about the upcoming workshops for potential candidates for the elections, which at this point are still happening later this year. But firstly, and in relation to that, the Minister's recently released the list of the structures that are going to apply to councils across the state at the next election. Have you had a chance to look through those?
Had a quick look, Chris. Yes, so the Minister announced there are 8 councils moving to single member wards and also nominated another 2 councils that will go to unsubdivided structure, if that is such a thing.
So there is a piece of advice I see that came out which sets out which council is going to have which structure, not just for this next election, but the one beyond as well, which is some clarity.
Yeah, nice table that has been released, basically setting out the structures for 2020 and also 2024 where available. And so that structure tells us that there's over 20 other councils that will move to a single ward structure in 2024. Nominates about a dozen councils that will move to what's called a compliant structure, whether that would be single member or unsubdivided, because they would be rural councils where it's needed to be determined. And then sort of nominates about a third of the councils across Victoria, which will remain unchanged from the current structures that they have.
So, Steve, fair to say that the single member wards are pretty much metropolitan only?
Yes, and that has been the intent, that the unsubdivided option is available to rural councils where a single member structure would just be impractical.
So there's another issue around the actual boundaries of wards within the municipalities. What's your understanding of how that's going to be sorted?
So interesting, Chris. The announcement this week set out the 8 councils that are moving to a single ward structure. It also says that submissions on ward names are required by the 25th of May to enable gazettal of those structures. So my reading would be the Minister has announced what the internal structures will be, presumably based on advice from the VEC, although that's not been said. The councils are to provide feedback where possible on the names. And it would appear at that point the Minister will take the matters to Executive Council to get an order that can be gazetted. Okay,
so there's some advice available on the situation as it stands now on the Know Your Council website or LGV website, I'm not sure, or both perhaps?
There's a bit on both, but the LGV website, the way the department's described it quite nicely, is the source of truth. And so if in doubt, the Local Government Victoria website's a good place to go.
Excellent. All right, so people can find out more from those sources. The implementation of Local Government Act 2020 continues, and I think I'm right in saying a number of sections came into effect as of last Friday.
That's true, Chris, and predominantly these are sections where, although they're in place, and check each clause to be certain, but there's a number where implementation is required by 1 September. So for the likes of delegations, governance rules, community engagement and public transparency policies, yes, they're in effect, but there's a 1 September deadline to implement. And in the meantime, the 89 Act provisions will carry over until such time as new provisions are adopted, which is a good reminder for councils, though, particularly, say, with adopting governance rules, that part of the resolution would need to include repealing or revoking the arrangements that are currently in place. There's some good resource around. A lot of councils have started to think about that. And I know a number of the legal providers have released templates, for example, and guidance materials that the council should be aware of.
So just to be clear, Steve, the sections came into effect last week, but you're not required to comply until the 1st of September, but if you want to go early, you can. If you want to do it now, you can.
Exactly. So, for example, it's quite clear that with delegations, that until such time as delegations under the 2020 Act are made, any delegations made under the 1989 Act will continue to have effect. So that is just one example.
All right, and the other thing we wanted to talk about is the upcoming workshops that the VLGA are running, and you and I are both involved in these, aimed at potential candidates who want to get a feel for the issues and things they need to be aware of prior to the election campaign really ramping up.
Yeah, so Chris, and good to be involved in that. There will be details emerging at some stage soon, presumably, as to what the mandatory candidate training will look at. There's a number of councils have got in early in terms of encouraging participation in elections. So the VLGA is one provider that's put together a pretty broad sort of summary of the requirements of the role of councillor, what people can expect of that role, the key focus, and maybe a few traps to avoid that people don't tell you about before you actually put the nomination in.
And fair to say the workshop will be customised in a sense to the particular council area in which it's being presented.
I think that's the joys of local government, Chris. It's local. So we work to the same structure, but there are elements, for example, the council plans of each council, of course they're different, and the customisation needs to take notice of that.
Excellent. All right. So I think that's starting to roll out later this month. So we'll probably talk some more about that in future governance updates as we see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting some feedback, Chris, as to what the issues are and the sense is around the state, particularly in this COVID environment.
So elections at this point are still happening in October. Check out episode 30, I think it is, of VLGA Connect for a discussion we had with the Minister going back a few days now. In which he's reserving judgment on that until we see what happens with COVID-19 restrictions. I'm getting a sense that we're waiting as long as we can to avoid having to delay if we don't have to. Is that a fair read, do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Chris. I think that a good approach to take is hope for the best but plan for the worst. There has been nothing authoritative to say that the elections will be cancelled, so really important to proceed on the basis, or postponed, I should have said, really important to proceed on the basis that they will occur.
Before we go, as of last week, virtual council meetings are a thing in Victoria now, and I've seen some snapshots from right across the state, so everyone's getting into it. Have you seen some yourself?
I have, and hasn't there been some terrific work done by a number of councils, which has probably thrown up some issues that generally might not have been thought about beforehand.
Can I make a special mention to Yarra Rangers? And, the CEO at Yarra Rangers is a very good personal friend of mine. I was really interested to see they'd colour-coded the backgrounds, the virtual backgrounds, one colour for councillors, different colour for officers, which really helped to see, who's who in the zoo, so to speak.
Nice disclosure, Chris, but also I agree, what fabulous transparency and thinking about the viewers who don't necessarily understand the distinction between the councillors and officers and making that really simple for them. I did see another council where they've got the council logo as a backdrop, in fact, Moonee Valley, for all the councillors, which has really removed a lot of that potential noise, because I know a lot of us have been playing with virtual backgrounds while we've been having Zoom meetings, but it probably doesn't work really well in a council meeting. So that simplicity, I think, is a really good thing too.
Steve, we spent quite a bit of time last week with the panel talking about chairing, particularly of effective council meetings, which has been viewed many, many times since then, which is pretty amazing considering it goes for an hour. What's your sense of what you've seen in terms of how mayors are rising to the challenge of chairing these complex sessions?
Really consistent feedback, Chris, about how it rises and falls on the quality of the chairmanship, the engagement of the chair in the conduct of the meeting. Little things, Chris, like... and we talked previously about walking through the local government, so the local laws, to identify any clauses that might be contrary to the amendment to the Act. But another thought that was thrown up by one council, which is a really nice one, is walking through and just identifying those parts of the meeting where good governance is served by suspending standing orders. That maybe you need to suspend standing orders when the chairman's seeking advice from the governance team in considering submissions, a whole lot of points in a meeting where formality doesn't work over a virtual meeting. So really identifying those points early. I did see one too from over the border, and I think it might have been the Albury Council who have found ways to be in the news this week.
Yes, definitely.
I think it was that council, Chris, but they had cards, and including one of the cards, and I think it was a point raised by Stuart James. One of the cards was a pink one, I think, for point of order, as well as, green for yes, red for no. So thinking through that to make it as really simple as possible for people to be clear as to what's going on.
Yes, I imagine the viewing numbers for Albury's meeting this week were probably higher than you would normally expect.
Better being talked about than not being talked about, Chris.
Bit of a storm warning there. Thanks, Steve. We do a governance update every fortnight here on VLGA Connect, and I must say it's one of the most watched regular programs that we have. So thanks for your support. If you'd like to be a part of future episodes or we have a story to tell, please let us know by emailing to vlga@vlga.org.au. Join us again soon for VLGA Connect.